Headlights sweep across a tranquil residential block. Substantial residences, meticulously maintained lawns, private driveways, the sort of locale where burglaries are uncommon and suspicion travels with far greater speed than verifiable facts. Ahead, the porch light of one domicile is illuminated, and positioned at the front door is a man, a black male, approximately 45 years of age, dressed in business attire, keys in hand, in the process of attempting to unlock the door. Composed, entirely unaware. Law enforcement is already approaching, operating under the presumption that he is an offender. The cruiser halts abruptly at the curb. The driver's door swings open with haste. The body camera jolts with the sudden motion as the officer disembarks. His hand is already resting on his sidearm. There is no pause, no window for preliminary assessment, no verbal introduction, simply the dispatch narrative overriding direct observation. The officer perceives a black man, an expensive house, a late hour, an attempt at door entry, and a conclusion is instantaneously formed. His firearm is drawn, raised, and aimed at the center mass of the individual. Do not move. The command erupts, shattering the quiet of the street. The man freezes instantaneously. Keys remain in the lock. What? Step away from the door, hands in the air. The man slowly lifts both hands. Utter confusion registers on his face. I reside here. Do not speak. Step down from the porch. Before we proceed any further, please inform us of your location. Let us ascertain the extent to which this narrative will propagate. Additional emergency lights flash behind the first cruiser as a second unit arrives. 2 more officers exit their vehicle, hands near their holsters, though not yet drawn. They observe the primary officer's stance and mirror his perceived threat level without hesitation, because once a firearm is drawn, the assumption of justification becomes pervasive. The man descends the porch steps deliberately, hands still raised, keys dangling from a single finger. I informed you, I reside here, he reiterates calmly. The officer maintains his weapon trained upon the man. Yes, the very same response you offer to every residence you attempt to infiltrate. I am not attempting to break in. Do you consider me foolish? The officer retorts sharply. The man blinks once, taken aback by the rapidity of the escalation. I was unlocking my own door. It appears as forced entry from my vantage point. With a key, keys are susceptible to duplication. The officer fires back. Neighboring porch lights begin to illuminate. Windows are being opened. Telephones are being raised discreetly in the darkness, because a drawn firearm transforms mere curiosity into immediate alarm. Turn around, the officer commands. For what purpose? The man inquires. For detainment during a burglary investigation. I have not burglarized anything. Turn around. The man complies. His movements are slow and controlled. His hands remain elevated as instructed. The officer advances and roughly grasps his wrist. Metal restraints are produced immediately. There is no attempt at verification, no inquiry into ownership, merely escalation. I am not resisting, the man states. You would be wise not to, the officer mutters, as the first cuff clicks shut on his wrist. The officer then utters the sentence that irrevocably shifts this stop from a procedural matter to one of profiling. Individuals such as yourself do not simply frequent neighborhoods like this after dark. Silence descends upon the street. The weight of it is palpable, recorded. The man turns his head slightly. I am not individuals such as myself, he states calmly. The officer tightens the second cuff nonetheless. Save it, he replies. You were reported as attempting to force entry. That is the pertinent information. One of the assisting officers finally breaks the silence. Sir, do you possess identification confirming your residency here? It is inside, the man replies. The primary officer scoffs. A convenient answer. I have just returned home. At midnight. I work late. Doing what, precisely? The officer asks skeptically. Corporate security consulting? The officer chuckles under his breath. Security, you say? Yes. How amusing. Breaking into houses on the side as well? The man exhales slowly, maintaining his composure. I am unlocking my own door with my own key. The officer gestures toward the house. You expect me to believe that someone of your description owns property of this magnitude. There it is, unfiltered. Not suspicion of criminal activity, but suspicion of ownership itself. The body camera meticulously records. A firearm drawn prior to any questioning. Immediate application of restraints. Disbelief in ownership directly correlated with race. Assumptions superseding the need for verification. A neighbor finally emerges from her dwelling. She is the one who initiated the call. She stands on the sidewalk, arms folded, observing the proceedings. That is him, she states. He was fiddling with the lock. The officer nods. Validation bias solidifies. You see, he says to the man now in handcuffs. The witness confirms it. I was opening my door, the man repeats. The neighbor squints. You do not reside here, she states. The man looks at her calmly. Yes, I do. And what none of them yet comprehend is that the home security system mounted above the porch has been actively recording long before the body camera unit even arrived. Clear footage depicting the man entering the driveway, utilizing his garage remote, and retrieving keys from within his own vehicle. Evidence already exists. Ownership is already meticulously documented, yet the officers have not bothered to check as they remain operating on visual assumptions rather than verified facts. And the most significant oversight, the man they have apprehended at gunpoint is, in fact, the registered homeowner, his name appearing on the property deed, matching the mailbox, the mortgage holder, and the primary resident. Once the relevant documentation surfaces, this stop will not be deemed justifiable. It will instead be subjected to a thorough investigation. The body camera footage continues to roll. The audio remains crystal clear. Every utterance is preserved, and the atmosphere on the front lawn has become palpably thicker, not chaotic, but a controlled tension, the kind that builds when authority commits to a predetermined narrative before any concrete evidence has been introduced. The homeowner, still restrained, stands at the base of his own porch steps, his wrists secured behind his back, keys still dangling from one finger. He has not raised his voice on a single occasion, nor has he resisted or argued beyond stating a simple factual assertion. I reside here. However, the officers have not processed this statement as truth. Instead, they have categorized it as a fabrication commonly employed by burglars. The primary officer paces back and forth slightly in front of him. His firearm is now lowered, but it remains in his hand, not holstered, which signifies that the perceived threat has not entirely dissipated. Do you possess identification inside? He reiterates. Yes, the man replies calmly. My driver's license, mail, security badges, all of it is inside. The officer smirks faintly. It is remarkably coincidental how suspects always seem to have their important paperwork located within the very house they are allegedly breaking into. I am not breaking in. You persist in repeating that assertion as if it lends it credibility. The neighbor who initiated the call stands a few feet away, arms tightly crossed, observing as if awaiting confirmation that she acted appropriately. I have resided here for 8 years, she informs the officers. I have never encountered him before. The man turns slightly towards her. I relocated here 3 months ago. She shakes her head. I am not convinced. The officer nods subtly. Bias is reinforced once more. You see, he states, the community does not recognize you. I work extended hours, the man explains. Individuals such as yourself always seem to have ready explanations, the officer mutters. One of the assisting officers shifts uncomfortably as the phrasing of the conversation is steadily drifting from procedural inquiry into unfounded assumptions. Nevertheless, he refrains from intervening at this juncture. The primary officer steps closer. Once again, his flashlight beam elevated, scanning the man's suit, his shoes, his watch, his cufflinks. These are costly accoutrements that do not align with the burglary narrative forming in his mind, which, instead of dispelling suspicion, only seems to exacerbate it. You are dressed quite impeccably for a burglary, he remarks. I was returning from work. What manner of employment requires one to wear suits at midnight? Corporate security consulting. The officer scoffs. Indeed, security for whom? Private and federal contracts. The officer chuckles more audibly this time. Come now, cease with the pretense. It is the truth. You expect me to believe that someone like you manages federal contracts? There it is again. Not disbelief in the job title itself, but in the individual who holds it. The man exhales slowly, maintaining his composure. Please examine my credentials inside. The officer shakes his head. No one will be entering the premises until we have fully secured the scene. That is my residence at present, the officer counters. This is an active burglary investigation. The assisting radio crackles faintly. Dispatch is in the process of checking property records after hearing the address relayed over the comms, but the officers on the scene have yet to formally request confirmation. They are still operating based on the caller's report and their preconceived narrative. The second assisting officer finally speaks. Sir, what is your full name? Malik Carter. The officer radios this information. A pause. Static. Waiting. Meanwhile, the tension escalates another notch as the neighbor steps closer. Once more, her voice now noticeably louder. I had a feeling something was amiss, she states. He was fumbling with the lock for an excessive amount of time. I was holding groceries in my hands, Malik replies calmly. My keys were in my pocket. She shakes her head. You appear nervous. I had a firearm pointed at me, he responds. Silence descends once more. This is because that particular answer carries a significantly greater weight than the initial accusation. The primary officer quickly interjects, reasserting control over the narrative. Do not become insolent. I am answering your questions. Are you answering them in a manner that suggests you find this amusing? I find absolutely nothing amusing about this situation, the man replies. The officer steps closer again, his voice lowering but becoming noticeably sharper. Do you have any idea how many burglary calls we receive where individuals claim they reside at the property? I am not one of those individuals. I am the homeowner. Everyone claims to be a homeowner once they are apprehended. Dispatch radio crackles with increased volume. The second assisting officer listens intently. His expression shifts subtly. But before he can voice his thoughts, the primary officer continues his aggressive line of questioning. Let me guess, he says. You acquired this property outright with cash, correct? I financed it, Malik replies calmly. With what funds? My company's revenue. The officer smirks. Ah, yes. And what is it that your company does again? Security consulting. The officer leans in closer. Are you running security operations or are you casing houses? Telephones are now fully raised by neighbors, recording openly, because tone carries as much significance as the words themselves, and the tone has demonstrably shifted from a procedural investigation to outright confrontation. The voice from dispatch now comes through with greater clarity. Unit on scene, the voice announces. Property is registered to homeowner Malik Carter. Deed confirmed. Mortgage active. The second officer looks up immediately. Hey, he begins, but the primary officer continues speaking over him, still focused on Malik, as he has not yet adjusted his perspective. You expect us to believe that you casually unlock million-dollar residences at midnight? I expect you to believe the truth, Malik replies. And what, pray tell? Is that truth? That this is my property? The second officer now steps forward. Hey, he says quietly to the primary officer. Dispatch, we have just confirmed. Hold on, the primary officer replies, still fixated on Malik because he has not yet recalibrated his assumptions. He remains entrenched in the narrative he constructed upon arrival. Malik speaks again, his voice steady but now carrying a firmer edge. Have you run the address yet? The primary officer does not respond. Have you checked the deed? Still no response. Have you verified ownership? Silence, because he had not. Then the second officer states it louder. The address is returning to him. The words land with considerable weight, but pride delays acceptance. The primary officer frowns. What? The property deed is registered to Malik Carter. The backup reiterates. Mortgage confirmed. The street falls silent. Even the posture of the neighbors shifts subtly. But the primary officer is not yet fully convinced because this confirmation directly conflicts with his ingrained bias. He looks back at Malik for a longer duration this time, reevaluating, recalculating. You possess proof inside? He asks again. Yes, Malik replies calmly. Mail, utility bills. Security system login credentials. The officer exhales through his nose. Still defensive. Still not prepared to concede any error, and then the next escalation trigger becomes apparent above the porch. A small red light blinks. A security camera is actively recording the entire encounter long before a body camera unit even arrived, and one of the assisting officers notices it. The camera is alive, he states. It has probably captured him pulling up. The implication lands instantly because security footage effectively removes conjecture. It replaces it with a precise timeline. Truth verification. The primary officer glances up at the camera, then back at Malik, then at the handcuffs, and the heavy weight of premature escalation begins to settle upon him. But the situation has not yet de-escalated because humiliation has already occurred, a firearm has already been drawn, accusations have already been uttered, and the neighbor has already reinforced pre-existing bias. And as dispatch continues to transmit confirmations over the radio, one critical fact becomes undeniably clear. This stop is no longer about a potential break-in. It is now about whether the officers acted based on verifiable evidence or on unfounded assumption. And once the footage is reviewed, that answer will be permanently established. The tension on the front lawn is no longer fueled by suspicion. It is now built upon uncertainty because the process of verification has begun. And verification, by its very nature, changes everything. The second assisting officer keeps his gaze fixed on the porch camera, a small black dome casing, a steady red recording light blinking, not merely decorative, but actively capturing events long before the patrol units arrived. He gestures toward it again. That system is live. He says most of these residences store their footage in the cloud. The footage does not engage in speculation. It clearly depicts a sequence of events, a timeline. The truth. Malik stands cuffed at the base of his own steps. He remains composed, controlled, but the emotional gravity of the situation has shifted slightly now because doubt has entered the officer's narrative. Not doubt about Malik, but doubt concerning their own response. Dispatch crackles over the radio again, clearer this time, confirming once more. Property deed registered to Malik Carter, primary resident. No burglary indicators reported by the alarm company. The second officer nods slowly, but the primary officer still has not holstered his weapon. It is lowered, but conspicuously present, a visible symbol of how far the escalation proceeded before the verification process even commenced. Malik speaks calmly. You're welcome to review the camera footage. The primary officer exhales sharply. We will address that, but his voice has lost some of its previous edge because each new confirmation serves to weaken the burglary narrative he had so meticulously constructed. Another patrol unit arrives. This one is a supervisor's vehicle, less urgent in its arrival, and as the sergeant steps out, the entire demeanor of the scene undergoes a transformation, because supervisors are not present to escalate situations. They are present to assess them. What is occurring here? The sergeant inquires calmly. The second officer answers first. The caller reported a potential break-in. The subject has been detained, but property records have been returned to him. The sergeant looks at Malik, then at the handcuffs, then at the porch, and finally at the camera. He processes the information rapidly. Did you verify the deed? He asks. Yes, sir, the backup officer replies. The alarm company. No breach was reported. The sergeant nods once, then slowly turns his attention toward the primary officer. Why is he still in handcuffs? Silence hangs in the air for half a second. Detained pending verification, the primary officer responds. Verification has just been completed, the sergeant states evenly. The words land with a weight far greater than any shouting ever could. Malik speaks again. His tone is calm, but now firmer. I informed you that I resided here. There is no hostility in his voice, merely clarity, and the body camera meticulously captures the distinction between the officer's tone and the homeowner's treatment. The sergeant gestures toward the porch camera. Let us confirm the timeline. One of the officers accesses the exterior security panel located beside the door. The screen illuminates instantaneously. The passcode is entered by Malik verbally, his hands still cuffed behind his back. because even while restrained, he is cooperating. Footage loads, clear, high definition, time-stamped, and the officers watch in silence. The video depicts Malik's vehicle entering the driveway, the garage door opening via remote activation. Malik exiting the vehicle carrying groceries. He retrieves keys from his pocket. He walks calmly towards his front door. There is no indication of forced entry, no evidence of tampering, no suspicious behavior whatsoever, merely a homeowner returning home late. The sergeant watches the footage twice, then looks back at the primary officer. His gaze lingers longer this time, measured. "Remove the cuffs," he instructs. There is no anger in his voice, but his authority underpins the command. The primary officer hesitates for half a second because uncuffing the man signifies an admission that the escalation was premature. However, procedure takes precedence over personal pride. He steps forward. The key is produced. Metal clicks. The cuffs are removed from Malik's wrists. Malik slowly rubs his wrists, not dramatically, merely restoring circulation, and the visual contrast is profoundly powerful. A homeowner detained at gunpoint on his own property. The neighbor who initiated the call stands frozen on the sidewalk now, her initial certainty completely evaporated because the footage has also dispelled her assumptions. I thought," she stammers. Malik looks at her calmly. "You believed I did not belong here." She says nothing, because any denial would sound hollow at this point. The sergeant steps closer to Malik. His tone is respectful. "Sir, I apologize for the escalation." Malik nods once deliberately. "I understand the necessity of responding to calls," he states. A pause follows. "But firearms should be drawn after confirmation, not before." The statement lands quietly, but carries more weight than any accusation. The sergeant nods again. "You are correct." He then turns to the primary officer. The weapon should have remained holstered until a threat was articulated. The phrasing is procedural, but undeniably corrective and subject to documentation. The body camera records the entirety of the supervisory review, which means internal affairs will also have access to it, because once a supervisor corrects conduct on the scene, it invariably triggers a reportable follow-up action. Malik flexes his wrists once more, then speaks calmly. "You stated that people such as myself do not frequent neighborhoods like this." The primary officer lowers his eyes slightly because that particular sentence is preserved forever on the body camera's audio recording. There is no denial forthcoming because any denial would be unequivocally contradicted by the footage. The sergeant exhales slowly, then states, "This encounter will be meticulously documented and reviewed, which translates to a thorough evaluation of the use of force, a review of biased language employed, and an audit of procedural compliance. The power dynamic has now fully shifted from armed suspicion to administrative accountability." Malik turns once more towards his front door. The key remains in his hand, but before unlocking it, he looks back one final time, not with anger, but with a clear, concise observation. "You did not investigate a break-in," he states calmly. A pause. "You investigated whether I belonged." Silence blankets the lawn, because that fundamental distinction is the real issue that has been exposed. He unlocks his door and steps inside, the front light spilling onto the porch as he disappears into his own home. The door closes softly behind him. The officers remain outside. The atmosphere is quieter now because the scene did not conclude with an arrest. It concluded with exposure, and the body camera continues to record. Every second is preserved for subsequent review, training purposes, disciplinary actions, and policy evaluation. If you are finding this documentary engaging thus far, please consider liking and subscribing, because what follows is not merely an apology. It will involve an internal investigation, the rendering of disciplinary findings, and consequences that will follow the officers long after the body camera ceases its recording. The body camera footage remains active even after Malik Carter has stepped inside his residence. The porch light remains illuminated, the front door closed, but the aftermath is still unfolding outside. Because while the immediate confrontation has ended, the process of accountability has only just begun. The sergeant turns towards the officers present on the scene. His tone is professional, measured, but unmistakably corrective. Deactivate your escalation posture, he instructs. Weapons are holstered, flashlights are lowered, and stances relax. Because now the situation is no longer a threat response. It has become an administrative one. The sergeant walks towards the patrol vehicles. The body camera continues to record as he speaks into his shoulder microphone. Supervisor on scene, detainment determined to be improper, homeowner confirmed. Requesting incident classification review. Those particular words carry significant weight because the classification of the incident will determine the subsequent consequences. This stop will no longer be logged as a burglary response. It will be logged as a wrongful detention. Inside the patrol SUV, the primary officer stands silently beside the open door. His adrenaline has subsided, replaced by a stark realization because the escalation had felt justified at the moment it occurred. But documentation does not account for feelings. It meticulously records conduct. The second officer approaches quietly. His voice is low. You should have waited for verification, he states. There is no accusation in his tone, merely a statement of fact. The primary officer exhales slowly. He does not respond, as there is no plausible defense that the body camera footage would not unequivocally contradict. Across the street, neighbors are still congregated outside. Their telephones are lowered now, but their conversations are active because community perception can shift rapidly when verifiable footage surfaces. You cuffed him at his own house and drew your weapon too. I recorded everything. Witness documentation now exists independently of the police cameras, which means the department's review will also incorporate civilian footage. Within hours, the recording would be uploaded, marked, and categorized for managerial oversight, as any instance of drawing a weapon during a detainment without a confirmed threat automatically initiates an internal review process. By morning, the Internal Affairs Division would commence a preliminary conduct investigation focusing on 3 key areas: premature firearm deployment, detention without proper verification, and language exhibiting bias as captured by the body camera. The statement, "Individuals like you do not frequent areas like this," would become critical evidence, given that policy not only dictates actions but also governs speech, and language inherently reveals intent. 2 days later, the officer primarily involved would be reassigned to administrative duties pending the investigation, with their badge and field authority temporarily suspended, a standard procedure during reviews concerning bias. Analysts specializing in the use of force would meticulously examine the body camera footage frame by frame, noting the firearm was drawn within seconds of arrival, with no visible weapon on the individual and no evidence of forced entry observed, while the subject remained compliant throughout. Their conclusion would be that the escalation of force far exceeded the perceived threat indicators. Community relations officers would be tasked with directly engaging with Mello Garner. A formal, written, and documented apology would be issued on behalf of the department, not a casual one. This would be because an unjust detention on private property carries the risk of civil litigation if not addressed properly. Malik would receive their apologies calmly in his living room, maintaining his composed demeanor, as his primary objective was not retribution but acknowledgement. "You were dispatched to a call," he would tell them, pausing briefly, "but you responded to me differently." He would decline pursuing legal action, but instead request departmental intervention, including mandatory bias retraining and review of escalation procedures and reinforcement of policies regarding firearm presentation thresholds. He would also request that the footage be utilized for training purposes rather than being suppressed, believing that exposure fosters correction. The department would agree, flagging the case for inclusion in academy instruction modules, where future recruits would study this encounter as an example of procedural failure, contrasting assumption with verification. Meanwhile, the neighbor who initiated the call would return days later, this time without any police presence, simply standing at Malik's front walkway with an apologetic posture. "I believed I was safeguarding the neighborhood," she would state quietly. Malik would nod once. "You assumed I didn't belong here?" She would not dispute his statement, as she would then comprehend the distinction between suspicion of criminal activity and suspicion of mere presence. Weeks would pass, and the administrative review would conclude, with findings being issued. The primary officer would receive a 30-day suspension without pay, mandatory retraining in bias and de-escalation techniques, a re-evaluation of their firearm escalation certification, and a probationary period of field monitoring. This would not be termination, but rather discipline that would impact their career, acknowledging that a policy violation had occurred, but that the officer had complied with subsequent supervisory directives. A departmental memorandum would circulate internally, emphasizing that verification must precede escalation whenever feasible. The Carter case would become cited precedent, with the training scenario footage archived and utilized in supervisor workshops and use of force seminars. Life on the streets would return to its usual rhythm. Patrol cars would still be seen, neighbors would still walk their dogs at dusk, and porch lights would still illuminate at night. However, public perception would have shifted, as one recorded interaction had altered the community's understanding of how rapidly assumptions can escalate into the use of force. Malik would continue his work in corporate and federal security consulting, but would subsequently install additional visible cameras on his property, not out of fear, but out of an awareness of the protective power of documentation, as the footage had once safeguarded him and could do so again. Each time he would unlock his front door at night, there would be a brief pause, not of hesitation, but a remembrance of how swiftly his right to be there had been questioned before it was confirmed. The body camera footage from that evening would remain archived in departmental records, permanently logged with its timestamp and audit trail. It would serve as a perpetual reminder that authority carries significant weight, but accountability possesses enduring permanence. The crucial lesson from that night was not about a burglary report, but about perception and the swiftness with which unchecked perception can morph into established procedure. And long after the patrol cars departed from that tranquil residential street, one truth would remain undeniably clear. The most perilous assumption an officer can make is deciding who belongs in a particular place before ascertaining why they are there. The end.